Scott Aukerman has served as the writer, director, and producer of Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis, and the recent short-form version of it, Between Two Ferns, the movie, sorta uncut interviews, was just nominated at this year's Emmys for Best Short-Form Variety Series. I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and Scott joins us today. And the first question I want to ask you, Scott, is how prepared are the celebrities for what's going to happen when Zach starts asking questions?
It's interesting because they're actually less prepared than a normal interview on a normal talk show. So if you ever do a normal talk show, like a late night talk show, you'll usually have 3 or 4 conversations with producers before you actually go out there, where they go over every single thing you're going to say. And they sort of say, remember that story, remember like that punchline of that, because the host is going to set you up for it. And so what we wanted to do when we did Between Two Ferns was kind of get back to when conversations were really just spontaneous and improvisational. So they're not prepared at all. The most I'll do is I started kind of having to have a check-in with people beforehand to see if they knew what the show was, because we ran into a couple of interviews over the years where the person was just told like, hey, do this thing by their publicist. They don't know what it is. And then when they get there, they're very confused as to what's happening and why Zach is insulting them. So I would have a brief conversation with people saying like, hey, Zach is going to insult you a lot, and, just be prepared for it. But that's about all that we would do.
So so they really did. They only knew that he was going to insult them. But which guest over the years that you've been doing this has been even knowing that part of it was the least prepared for what actually ended up happening?
We did one with Sean Penn that was kind of a little uncomfortable for whatever reason. Like I know he wanted to do it. He called up Zach and that's how we did most of them in the early years. Was people would just call Zach and say, hey, I want to do this, or I would call someone, or so he really wanted to do it. But I think what he was unprepared for was that for that particular episode, Zach shaved off his beard and was playing his twin brother, Seth Galifianakis. And he was not prepared for that. He thought he was getting the full Zach Galifianakis experience. So it got very tense in the room. And I was loving it. I thought it was all an act, Sean Penn's a great actor and so intense, and it got really intense, and he was threatening to beat Seth Galifianakis up. And but Zach felt very intimidated by that and came up to me and said, hey, we're stopping the interview now. and we cut it short. So I don't know how much of that was an act on Sean Penn's part, but I think that one in particular was one that he didn't really expect. There have been other ones where like I started having to have that conversation with celebrities, telling them about this, because there were just a couple where the people didn't know what they were in, what was going to happen. For instance, like Cardi B, was so nice to do it. And I explained everything to her publicist and manager, and they were like saying how great this was going to be. But I don't think anyone had explained to her what it was. And in fact, we found out she didn't know who Zach was. And didn't know who the other guest, Jerry Seinfeld, was, until finally she like put it together after a few minutes. She was like, oh, wait a minute. You're the guy with that show, aren't you? Which was really funny. So that's why I just would have to break it to people of like sort of what the structure of the show is. Zach's going to insult you and just sit there and react the way you would react if someone was insulting you like that.
So were you part of actually developing this, first developing this with Zach Galifianakis, and how did this whole idea come about for this type of talk show?
Well, I was doing a pilot back in the day. It was a sketch show pilot, and we had a really good cast for it of regular people on it, like Casey Wilson and Paul Rust and James Adomian, and Natasha Leggero, some really great people. But I really wanted to do something with Zach on it, and I knew Zach would only do like one thing. He would only do one video. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, do you want to do something? I don't know what we would do, but we have these cameras. Could you just come by and we'll shoot something?" And I had also been talking to Michael Cera about doing something as well. So we just said like, "Hey, let's do it together." And so Zach came by the office and we were talking about things, and he said, "I've always wanted to do a fake public access talk show." And he and I had both worked in public access. I worked in public access when I was in high school. I think Zach worked in public access television when he was in his 20s. And so we both knew that world, and it was a really funny world to us. And Zach said, "I have an idea for the title. It's just called Between Two Ferns," which made me laugh really hard because working in public access like I did, I knew that you could never afford any set dressing other than like two giant plants. Like you'd have two chairs, a table, and two giant plants. So that made me laugh. So we just shot it one day in a basement, weirdly enough, in the basement of the building where I edited the movie, 10 years later. And we just improvised it, and it was really funny. And we put it up on this new website that our friends all worked at called Funny or Die, which ended up being, one of the more popular comedy websites on the internet. And that's just how it started. And we only thought we were going to do one. So we just put it up and we're like, that's funny. And then Jimmy Kimmel called us, I think 3 months later, and said, "Hey, I really want to do an episode of your show." And we said, "Show? No, we just made a funny video. What are you talking about?" And he said, "No, we should do another one and I should be the guest." And that had never occurred to us. So we did one with him, and then more and more people started calling us and saying they wanted to do it. And that's how it turned into like a regular thing.
So I just thought of something about how you were talking about how you prepare the guests. I'm guessing with some guests you could just be like, "Oh yeah, he's gonna insult you, so just play along." But with two of your guests, former President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, I'm guessing the process was a bit more rigorous than that to set that up.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it was for Barack Obama. Part of my job as a producer of these is to try to ensure that the process of filming be as pure as possible. That usually entails making sure that the amount of people in the room is as small as possible, because we really liked when we were doing it in the basement I mentioned, or at one point we shot Charlize Theron and Natalie Portman in this shed that Funny or Die had, like this tool shed that we like sort of cleared and put all of the gardening tools off to the side and shot it in there. So part of my job is trying to make the process like super contained, because I feel like when there are very few people in the room, people aren't performing. They're like a little more like their real self. So for Barack Obama, part of my job was to say, like, we really want to do it the way we normally do it and improvise it and have very few people in the room. And at a certain point, the people we were dealing with at the White House came back and said, "Yeah, that's just not happening." Like, this needs to be kind of scripted. But to their credit, they fought for jokes that I was sure they were going to cut out of the thing. And at a certain point, there was some discussion of like, should we cut this joke or not? And the people at the White House were like, "You know what? No, this is your guys' deal. Like, we want this to be as funny as possible. So keep the jokes." So that was really good. And then when we did Clinton, interestingly enough, I fought back really hard. I just gave a lot of pushback and said, we really want to improvise these and do it like we normally do it, because I kind of feel like politicians, when they appear on talk shows, they're very canned and they're reading scripted lines, and you can always tell they're, acting. And it always seems like they're doing this thing that they just like got pushed into doing in between 8 other things. So to their credit, the Clinton campaign said, "Okay, we'll do it your way." And she came and improvised the whole thing, and, stayed there for a good hour and 45 minutes. And then to top it off, She had already done like 8 hours of campaigning and then still had 4 more hours after that. And she had pneumonia that day. We found out later that was when she had pneumonia. So her stamina was like incredible for that. So yeah, for both of those, they were two very different experiences, but I always enjoy improvising them a lot more.
I think the best part of that the whole Hillary Clinton thing is absolutely hilarious. But I do think my favorite gag in that is when the chyron comes up and it says "had pneumonia" below her name.
Right.
That was hilarious.
That's her one credit. She had pneumonia. Yeah, and we didn't even know she had pneumonia when we filmed it. That was a thing that, like, in the 2 weeks, I think, of editing that we had, that story came out, so it's just, that was one of the ones that we've done. Sometimes we'll do these and they'll like sit in the can for 3 months or so, and doing the ones for the movie, we shot the movie back in September, October of 2018, and then the movie didn't come out until September of 2019. So we were sitting on those for a whole year. So we knew that, we, in the moment when we improvise them, we're doing jokes about things that are current events, but we knew we had to do jokes that were had more of a shelf life, if that makes sense.
So one of the trademark things about Between Two Ferns is how it is how everything is very deadpan. It's very, that it just works like that. But what I'm curious about is, have there ever been incidents where a guest or even Zach himself haven't been able to keep a straight face during the interview?
Yeah, that actually, Zach is the worst offender when it comes to that. I mean, when we started doing the movie and we knew we had between 15 and 20, I think, interviews that we had to do during production of the movie. And I had to have a talk with Zach and say, like, hey, we're a little under the gun with, resources and time that we have to shoot this movie. You really need to stay in character as much as possible. If you watch the movie, during the credits of the movie, you will see how successful he was at not breaking during it, which is to say, not at all. So in the credits of the movie, there's a whole blooper reel of people breaking during this, which is really funny, which we've never released before the movie, because we always wanted to keep the illusion that these were very deadpan.
Is there anyone that you really would want to have on an episode of Between Two Ferns who you haven't had already?
Yeah. Wow. We have a great premise for The Rock. That's one that we came up with an idea for one to do with him while we were doing the movie, and he was too busy during the movie, and that's one that we always kind of reach out and see if he's ever available to do it, because we have a really good idea for that one. So that's one I'd really like to do. But I mean, it's kind of interesting because this is the kind of thing I never thought it would last 11 years at this point, but they keep making new movie stars and they keep doing dumb stuff that we can make fun of. So it kind of could never end.
So you're actually already a 2-time Emmy winner. Both of those wins were for Between Two Ferns. What was that experience like of receiving your first nomination and then receiving your first win?
Well, I first got nominated back in the 90s for Mr. Show with Bob Odenkirk and David Cross as a writer. And what's interesting about those shows, and I've had friends who have gotten nominated since then, and I've tried to explain this to them, which is you will normally go in expecting not to win. And then when you're sitting in that crowd, it does a number on you psychologically where you start to think, well, I could win, couldn't I? And once they announce your category, the adrenaline gets to you where suddenly you're thinking, oh, wait, I haven't really planned what I'm going to say if I win or anything. And you start mentally saying to yourself, I could do this. I could win. And the high is so high leading up to them announcing the winner, and the low is so low because you crash so hard when you don't win. And that happened to me a couple of times where you start feeling kind of terrible about yourself in a way, which is funny because I've worked on award shows as a writer, like the Emmys for Andy Samberg and the Oscars for Chris Rock. And there's a rule when you're writing those things of like, put all the funny stuff at the beginning of the show, because the audience gets worse and worse as the night goes on, because 80% of them have lost the later the show goes on. And just is sitting there feeling terrible about themselves. So in any case, the 2 times that we won, I kind of felt like we were going to win for the Obama one. So that one I was a little more prepared for. And when we did win, I was prepared for it. But for the Brad Pitt one, it was like, I had nothing planned to say. So I literally thought of 2 jokes to say, in the 20 seconds before it was announced. And so I went up there and said them, which was, I think is the better way to do it. I think when people try to list a bunch of names, it's really boring. So I think it's always better to never thank anyone, which my wife is really upset about because the last time I won, I did a bit where I said I wanted to thank my wife, Sharon, and then was like, I'm sorry, Jennifer, God, I'm so nervous. And it was just a bit, but my wife, whose name is Kulop, did not like that. And she was like, why don't you actually thank me? I'm like, well, that's boring. You should do a bit when you go up on stage.
Have to explain show business to her, apparently. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best at the upcoming ceremony, however that may, manifest itself. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, subscribe to our channel to get our latest content, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you.